Okay, I want to start off by giving all praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashim, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashim, Rakah, Quadash. Double honors to the apostles and elders of Great Millstone, who teacheth the Bible in 100% truth, and Shalom to the hopeful elect of the 12 tribes of Israel, especially the 144,000, who consist of the Negroes, Latinos, and Native Americans in the land of the Americas, as well as the speckled bird, Israelite foreigners living amongst the other nations. Shalom to you. Okay, today I'm looking at First Corinthians chapter 7, and it's been about a week or so since I managed to upload a video, and in theory, I'd like to be able to upload videos a little bit more frequently. In theory, it's very easy to pick up the book and just pull up a chapter, or find an example and to break it down. But from my point of view, what I tend to experience is that I have to sometimes live a particular situation or scenario, and then to be able to then make the video from it, or have the reason to go into certain particular scriptures. It's not something that I choose, but it's obviously the spirit that operates, how it operates around me, and so on and so forth. And so, like, a few weeks back, I mean, like, what I was going to say actually also is that whole thing with the spirit controlling, like, if you like, I have this idea of what I want to do, but then the spirit kind of guides me into a different direction for certain things. This has been happening before I came into the truth. So, even throughout my life, certain situations, certain scenarios present themselves, and it's kind of out of my hands. It's out of my doing. So, when I was young, for example, when I was at school, I went to like a normal state school, public school, a school that's free, pretty much no fees to go to the school. Just like most of the population in the school, in the country, they'll go to a school like that, where you go to a school where it's in the UK we call it a state school, run by the state pretty much. Free lunches, so on and so forth. Basic education. At some point, for example, my family, my 'cause my dad wasn't around, so my mum used to rely on my granddad, and then he had a pretty decent business at a certain point. So they decided to take me out of that state school and put me into a private school. So when you're young, you tend to go to one school, up until the age of like 12, and then after that you go to like a high school. So by the time I had completed the first 12 years of school, I'd been to two different sides. I'd been to the state school, and then I'd been taken out of that and put into the private school. So now I'm hanging around with rich kids. Some of these kids, their parents are famous, and I'm going to school with them. And then they're like they charge like £3,000 a term. You're going back like 20, 25, 30 years, so they'll charge like £3,000 a term, 10 grand a year, pretty much, to join the school. So I went in there. I'm just giving you an example, of a situation that I've been through before. And then, from there, you go into high school. So from being in the private school, I went into the private high school. And then, again, um, going, you learn in a different aspect to what you would learn in the state school when you go to the state schools. So, you instead of playing football, you end up playing rugby and cricket. You go to these private schools, they teach you Latin. They'll have Latin classes. You don't really get that in the state school, and certain things like that. So obviously the culture is completely different. You hang around with different people, but halfway through the high school, that private high school where they were paying fees. My granddad's business had an issue, so then I had to come out of that school and go back to the state school. But this time, when it was, in the UK, you take your exams, your high school exams at 16. So to leave a school at 15, no other school, state school, wanted to take me on because there's only like 1 year left until the exams. So it's not really looking good. So then the only school that would take me then at 15 was a state school, but it was a religious school and it was a Sikh school. And so, the Sikhs, which is the culture that I came from, that's these people go back to the Israelites. There's another video that I'll do on that. You look at the Eastern culture, you look at the Western culture, there's completely two different ways of life. And then through that, you then got to appreciate how far away you are from what you used to be. Your forefathers were from the East. Now you're living in the West. You have a Western culture, Western mindset. And even though you come back to this truth, you've got to look at these people that are in the East, and they have their own, there's a certain type of way that they deal with things. People are much more religious in the East than they are in the West. But this is a video I'll go into on another aspect. So, but that schooling system that I went through, I went to all these different types of schooling systems with different cultures, different religions, met different types of people, and then I went to college for a year, and I got kicked out of there, and then I decided to work. And so, as much as you try to like do the right thing and go through, just like any normal person, I'd try to go through a schooling system and just do one school here, one school, high school, but it didn't work for me. And that's the spirit, you see. So the spirit, whatever you decided you wanted to do was the right thing. Logically, you make up your mind, but then the spirit says, no, well, I've got a different idea for you. And everything is predestinated, pre-planned. So all the people living on the earth today, all the things that they're doing, they think that they made decisions and choices to do the things that they're doing, but ultimately there wasn't much say in the path that they take through life. So you can try to be rich, but if your destiny is to be poor, you're going to be poor. If you don't really worry about money, your destiny could just to be to make it and make money. It's whatever's set. So you carry that forward. Sorry, I know that was a bit of a long thing. You carry that forward to today. It's 2025, and then you hear me breaking down these videos, teaching the name of Yahweh, by Hashem Yahushua, the true name of the Most High Yahweh, the God of the Bible, and we break down the scriptures, the Bible, in correctly, break down the prophecies. So it's the same thing today. So if I have to then make a video, a lot of the times I have to live out a scenario, live out a situation, have to come to terms with it, have to deal with it, and then I have to be able to have the time to sit down and apply it back to the scriptures, and then I have to then make a video from it, and then that's usually sometimes how you see me present the video. So rather than thinking that I'm the type of person that would sit down every day and just pull up a chapter and just make a video, yeah, I could do that, but the spirit that works around me is very overwhelming. So you get to the point where you can only follow what the spirit makes you and wants you to do. Like when I was 24, I met a woman in Liverpool when I was up there, and her name was Paula. Paula, like Apostle Paul, but with an A. You have this female name, Paula. And she said to me, she said I got £2 million in the bank. I just got divorced. She was married to some, rich doctor. She said she had £2 million in the bank, and she said, I want to move to America. And she said, I want you to come with me. And what it is at the time, you see, I knew not to go because you think, wow, shit, this chick's got two mil in the bank. I could go to America, Edomite chick. But obviously the Edomites in Liverpool, a lot of them do go back to Jake's, and but I turned it down. And I turned it down because the type of I knew, I'm that type of person. I'll go to America to start a new life with £2 million, and I'll get shot in the first 24 hours. mistaken identity. So I refused. I said, no, I'm not going to go. And even now, I think to myself, okay, so if had I been in America and I would have joined this truth, and then I would probably try to join GMS, whether they'd let me in or not. But then GMS would kick me out because I wouldn't turn up every week at the same time. As much as I'd want to, as much as I tried my best, um, I'd I'd have to. But it's the Most High that controls what I have to go through. And like I say, I'm in that phase where I have to go and live out certain aspects, and then to be able to present the video to you. So that's why today I'm going into First Corinthians, just the first 14 verses probably, which is says here teaching on marriage. It's Apostle Paul speaking on marriage, and obviously he's speaking to the people of Corinth 2,000 years ago, but it also applies to the times that we're living in today. So you go back 3 weeks ago, and 3 weeks ago I went into sport. I made a video about sport, and I related the truth to sport, and I haven't done that before. And in that video I said, like obviously I used to go to all these different sporting events, and obviously since I came to the truth, since I had the vision, since I had that encounter 2018, the angel came, showed me a couple of things, and obviously since then I had a different spirit, so I've stopped going to these sporting events. But then I used a video, the examples of sport, to relate them to the scriptures. And so after that, making that video, this is where you see I have to live out the process week to week to be able to present the video, and that's what's been happening in the last 3 weeks or so. So I made the video, and then I went away, and a few days later, the Most High presents it, so that I had the chance to go to this boxing match, which I explained before. So then I made another video, and I said, look, I spoke about sport. The Most High made it happen. So now I'm going to this sporting event. I rejected it. It came back, but this time it got offered back to me for free, so I couldn't really say no. So now I'm going to go to this sporting event. And so, but then the day I went to the sporting event, you see, the Most High does things for us. I use these examples to show you, look, I show you how the Most High is listening to us. He can hear us. He heard me made the video. When we come out and tell these people we got the secrets of the Most High, it's not a joke. So he hears what we say. He gives us the things to say. We say it, and the proof that he hears us, Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, can hear us speaking in their name, and they're happy with it, because then they present things back to us to make you feel like, yeah, you did the right thing. So as much as that happens, you also get the tribulation. You have to go through certain scenarios. You have to have realizations. So the most time it needs to make you go through realizations to realize it. And sometimes you have to go through a scenario for a week, for 2 weeks, for a month, or for a year, or for however long, to make you then realize what's actually happening. Don't forget, we're dealing with Yahweh Bashim Yahweh Shai, a living power. This is a living power. So everything you're doing is being watched, and there's a back and forth, especially if you're a prophet. So I had that example where I spoke about sport, and then the Most High did something. It's something that I could enjoy. So I went down to the boxing match. That was a week ago. But on the same day, then I found out something which basically, the only simplest way I can say it, just pissed me the fuck off on the same day. And so, in my mind, on one hand, I'm like happy that I get to go to this boxing match, and I'm thinking, yeah, all praises to the Most High, how He made that happen in the last 2 weeks. But at the same time, the same day, I found something out, and it just pissed me the fuck off. And so then I'm thinking, well, the Most High presented this, and He presented it on the same day. So there's your yin and yang. There's your two sides to the coin. There's your bitter, there's your sweet. But in this scenario, it happened to come on the same day. So there was a bitter and sweet scenario, and so the bitter and sweet scenario was involving my wife. Now, obviously, this from there, basically, I've just been pissed off all week. I didn't talk to her for about 5 days. But obviously, at some point yesterday or the day before, I think it's the day before now. So had to kind of squash the problem and sort it out and kind of get it back to normal. But then obviously from there, I had to take the experience and present the information to make the video, and you're going to see that it all links in. Because so last weekend I went to the boxing event, like I said to you before. I made that video, for example, speaking of Corinth 2 weeks ago, and I showed you the vase that they had to honor or commemorate the Isthmian Games in Corinth. Now this is Corinth. You can see on this map here, and you can see this little bit of land connecting, the two main bodies of land. You've got this little piece here, and this is where the Isthmian Games were held. I forgot what it's called, the Corinth something, that little bit of area there, but you can see Corinth. So when I spoke about the boxing and the sport, and I pulled up the vase, and then I showed you the 20s, the modern day version of the vase. You've got the Euro Championships, and then it's showing you how everything's a repeat. And then, so then, when you look at Corinth and the Apostle Paul 2,000 years ago, and he was speaking to the people there, they had a lot of issues with marriage and relationships between man and woman. So that's why then in the letters to Corinth, as we can see in First Corinthians, he's speaking about marriage. So the same, that you can link the two things together. Corinth is about, two of the things that you can think of when you think of Corinth in ancient times. You think of Apostle Paul and the sport. You can think about Apostle Paul giving teachings on marriage. So for myself this week, I lived that scenario where I spoke to you about the sport. Then the Most High presented me a ticket. I said, look, the Most High got me a ticket to the boxing. So I've gone to the boxing. And then on the same day, you end up in a scenario with your marriage. And it's nothing bad. It's not like, she committed adultery or this or that, or, nothing stupid like that. But it's something that I found out that I didn't really realize. But, she didn't really mean to. In the end, it turns out she said she didn't really mean to do no harm, but she did it, and it just pissed me the fuck off. And I was like, you should have asked me, so on and so forth. This is the problem you're going to get. This is the problems that Apostle Paul spoke about. You'll have trouble in the flesh. So then, obviously, from that week there, from having the sporting event and then having to read Apostle Paul's marriage counseling advice at the same time on the same day, being pissed off all week, sorting the situation out and then clearing my head and then making a video. You can see that's me living out, making the video. I don't know what my next video is going to be about. I've got all these windows open up at the top here, and I'd like to think, I'll just pull out one of these and make a video, but that's not going to happen. Something's going to happen in the next couple of days. It's going to throw me over here, or it's going to throw me over there, and it's going to do this, and it's going to do that, and at the end of the week, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to think, shit, I'll go and find it in the scriptures. I'll find it, and things will start to link up. So, you go to 1 Corinthians, for example. You got, for example, verse 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 28. It says, "But if thou marry, thou hast not sinned, and if a virgin marry, she hath not sinned. Nevertheless, such shall have trouble in the flesh, but I spare you." So you're going to have trouble in the flesh dealing with women. In the scriptures, according to the Most High, the Most High's perfect law, without any adaptations. You're really supposed to, as a woman, if you sleep with a man, you're supposed to stay with that man for the rest of your life. The process of having sex with a man is also the process of marriage. So, this whole idea that we live in the modern world where you have these women that run around and they have three or four different men before they actually quote unquote get married. Um, according to the Most High, this is not the right thing to do. Now you got to think to yourself, why would the Most High make such a law? It's because obviously when you sleep with a man, when a woman sleeps with a man, part of you got physical aspects to it as well, but even on a spiritual sense, the woman is taking on the spirit of that man that she sleeps with. There's a deep connection when you have sex. You can look at sex as a superficial thing. That's what people do nowadays. I just need sex, so they sort of do it on a superficial level, get a physical relief, and then they leave the scenario, the situation. But if you're in, especially if you're in a relationship with someone, you kind of give yourself to that person. So there's a huge emotional connection, and then your spirit connects. You break up with this man as a woman, you then end up with another man and another man and another man, and before you know it, you've got all these different spirits on you. And this is why you find that a lot of women that sleep around, they'll say daddy issues, but also they've got spiritual issues. So when a woman has multiple spirits of men on her, you can't pair bond with that particular person. So in my scenario, you know, um, I'm fortunate enough that the Most High presented me a woman who was actually a virgin when I met her. I met her in Cyprus, which is Kittim, and that's in 2007. And at that time, obviously, she was a virgin. So I didn't realize it at the time, but you come into the truth. Things are working, they're working out smooth, everything's fine. You come into the truth, you start learning the scriptures, you start picking up information, you start learning about pair bonding, and you realize, this is the description of what I've actually done. If you meet a virgin, you're actually able to pair bond with the woman because she doesn't have all these different spirits on her. So women make mistakes because they're living in this world today. But one of the things that a lot of women do today is they commit adultery. Adultery is not really, by going out and jumping with men to men to men. By doing that, it's they're basically they're making it impossible for a man to pair bond with them, and that's why you see a lot of these women, they end up in a lot of states, or they end up grabbing what they can when it gets later on in life. They get into a state, some of them end up lonely, so on and so forth. You've got to look into today's society. What they would call like a boring, dry woman, dry chick. You're at school, you met the dry chick. She's dressed, her body's covered up. She's got glasses. Her hair doesn't look fascinating. This woman, when she meets a bloke, she'll end up staying with the bloke, and it'll last a lot longer than you cool kids. All the cool kids at school, and they're doing this, doing that. They've got all these cool things about them: their hair, the way they look, the way they dress, what they do, what they're into, to impress each other. But but when they jump from partner to partner to partner, they're taking away their own ability to pair bond, even later on in life. You have these people that have four or five, these women, sorry, they have 4 or 5 divorces. You're definitely a woman that cannot pair bond. So that's why, as a man, you come across a woman like that, you should really be avoiding her. So in my situation, I have been able to pair bond. So even in that aspect, I don't really worry about the her running out on me. You got to realize, again, in the kingdom of heaven, you're gonna have all these women. As a man, you'll have multiple women. They'll be virgins. You'll sleep with them. They'll be your wives. They'll have children. Then they're not gonna run out on you. You'll pair bond with them on a one-on-one, and then it'll be within their spirit that'll be enough to satisfy them. You see, what happens to a lot of the women in the modern day is they get told by their mothers, go out and live your life. Don't just settle with the first man. So they get with a man, and it's in the back of their head. Well, maybe there's something better out there. So the trigger has already been set off, and then once they jump to another man, They might go, oh, I should go back with the last man, but then they end up in a love triangle. Maybe they can't go back with the last man, so they go forward into a different man, and maybe then they go searching for different men their whole lives, trying to find the same one as that first man or whatever it is. The problem is it's setting you off on that course. You know, in ancient times, especially like I said, in the East, in the you know, my mum, she got arranged marriage, what they would call an arranged marriage. So my granddad met, you know, knew with like certain type of people, blah blah blah, in the area. Oh, they had their sons they were looking to marry, and you look at them and you look at, you know, you pretty much look at like a CV. It's like a CV. You look at a CV of this particular person. Who is he? Who's his parents? What's he got? What type of education have they got? What type of resources, land have they got? And that's how you they were doing the marriages. That was all the way up until like the 80s, and it still happens today. So living in this Western culture, you know, you're at the opposite end of the scale. Women are running out and testing the waters everywhere they want to go before they settle down. By the time they settle down, they wonder why they can't settle down. You know, men have their own problems, and that goes into another aspect. But you know, just because you may, what I'm trying to get at is, you may find a virgin, and then you may pair bond. You may never have that issue where she's looking at other men. She's never had that spirit of other men on her. She's never really showed any signs or any desire to cheat or whatever. You know, it could have been so many years, but you're still then going to find trouble in the flesh because you're living in a kingdom that's adverse to your spirit. And you know, people make decisions, they do things. You know, you could be with an unbelieving wife that eats pork, that gets tattoos, that, you know, does, you know, wears revealing clothing, so on and so forth, and all these things. You know, so you're mixed in between this battle, in between what you want and what you're trying to accept that the world keeps saying is okay. But you go to here, it's a First Corinthians chapter 7, starting at verse 1. Now it says, now concerning the things whereof ye wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. Now when you look at that word touch, um, it's, hang on, let me press, I'm not going to get the pronunciation wrong.
Strong's G 680, hoptami, hoptami. Thayer's Lexicon, hopto, hopto.
And so you got this particular word here, and it says to fasten oneself to, adhere to cling to. So, you know, even you go to the root word, it says to fasten, to adhere, to fasten fire to a thing, kindle, or set of fire. So when you look at it, really, what Apostle Paul's saying here is, now concerning things whereof you wrote unto me, it is good for a man not to, you know, kindle something, start something with a woman. It says not to touch a woman, and people will read that for literal, and they say, oh, Apostle Paul, you know, says don't, you know, as if like he's against being with women. But what he's saying, trying to say, is don't kindle something, don't start something, don't fasten yourself if you're not already fastened at the minute. It says, nevertheless, to avoid fornication, to avoid people just sleeping around with each other just to get it out of their system. It says, let every man have his own wife, and let every woman have her own husband. It says, let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. It says, so you know, you got, the bottom line is people are going to want to have sex. You know, you've had sex before you came to this truth. You found out, you know, you're a Hebrew Israelite. The Spirit's working on you. You want to, you know you're under faith, under grace. You know you don't have to follow the law 100%, but certain things obviously are a big deal. And one of them is obviously the, you know, how things working within your marriage, or, you know, whether you're looking for a partner, or, you know, where you should be at. in this situation. You've got IUIC. You'll join IUIC, then they want you to. Your wife has to convert to a believer within 6 months. If you don't, you have to leave her, and then after that, supposedly, all these things are supposedly. Then, even then, they'll try and find you a quote unquote Hebrew Israelite woman. That's just that's living the way of the world. But Apostle Paul's giving you something different. He's saying, well, it's good for you not to fasten yourself to a woman, but nevertheless, if if you're really going to have to have, to take care of your physical needs, he says, let every man have his own wife, and every man and every woman have her own husband. Let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. So once you have this woman, you're not then supposed to, do, have a treat, act towards her in wickedness. For example, you got this thing that Alazar was doing, with this situation where he gets his wife to, have sex with someone else in front of him. This is not rendering his wife with due benevolence. You're being wicked. You're actually making your woman, you know, commit adultery, and you're making it happen right in front of you. Not only that, obviously that's bad enough as it is. The fact that you'd want to do that, this is not, you're not treating his woman with due benevolence. It says, and likewise also the wife unto the husband. It says, the wife have not power over her own body, but the husband, but likewise also the husband have not power over his own body, but the wife. So, you see, for example, in Alazar, somewhere in here, his mind is twisted, because it says, but the husband, the wife have not power over her own body. So it's the husband that's in charge. Also, surely in his mind, he's thinking, well, he can get someone else to to hit her up while, in front of him. It says, but let the husband render unto the wife due benevolence. So don't make her commit adultery, and make her get punished by the Most High, because end of the day, is ultimately what would happen. The Most High might have a punishment for you for doing it, but he'll also punish her. So you're putting her in front of the train to be hit by the train. But then again, she's probably got multiple demons on her, because she's probably played the field. So they're definitely not pair bonding. When you look at that particular example of Alazar, it says, defraud ye not one another, except it be with consent for a time, that ye may give yourselves to fasting and prayer, and come together again, that Satan tempt you not for your incontinency. So you're gonna have, like, obviously sexual urges. That's the whole idea why then it's better not to fasten yourself to a woman, but if you have to, go and find that woman. But then once you get with that woman, try to do things correctly. There's certain times, for example, on a Sabbath, you shouldn't be having sex. That's maybe a time when you give yourself to prayer. It says, come together again, and you always got to work it out together. You've got to stay together as a unit, and understand that there's a spirit that's going to try to work on your minds as individuals to try and separate you and work against you. In my scenario, myself, what was frustrating to me is that I can go into these scriptures and I can break them down and have all this understanding. My wife is an unbeliever, but she's a Christian. So she tries to do things according to what she thinks the scriptures say, but then she gets it wrong. And then when I try and tell her, this is how she don't want to buy it. So this is where, obviously, it led her to do certain actions. It led me to just get mad. And then I just blew my top. I said, I'm not having this, blah, 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 X, Y, Z. And I had to show her a couple of things or two. So, Apostle Paul says, if you have an unbelieving wife, obviously you can stay with her, as long as she's happy to be with you. Now, that's been my situation up until now, but obviously at some point there comes, a crossroad where it could be anything. You might have this unbelieving wife. She's happy for you to be, to call yourself whatever you call yourself. She's happy for you to believe in this truth. You call yourself a Hebrew Israelite. You call on the names Yahweh, Bashim, Yahweh Shai doesn't bother her. She wants to stay with you. But ultimately, at some point, there will be some trouble in the flesh. Maybe one day she'll pull out a pork sandwich. Maybe one day she'll want to get a tattoo. Maybe one day she wants to, just a whole multitude of things. Obviously, there's things in the world you do that involve things which you then have to actually check and go, well, I can't really get myself involved in that. She might even say, oh, I want to go to a swinging club. And again, you've got to say, well, nah, definitely can't be doing that according to the scriptures or whatever. There's multiple examples out there. Obviously, I'm just trying to pluck a few out of the air. It says, but I speak this by permission, and it says, and not of commandment. So again, you see, this is what someone like Alazar, this is all these types of things spin around in his brain. This is why he'll jump up quick and say, well, Apostle Paul was speaking his own opinions, not speaking commandments. But what Apostle Paul's doing is he's giving advice to the Corinthians at the time. And when you actually check it, that we're living in today, 2025, and these scriptures apply to exactly to us now the same way, because the same things are happening. People are swinging, people are having multiple partners before they settle down. And people are getting married for X amount, 10, 15 years, then they're saying, oh, I fell out of love, and then they're bouncing on and doing this, that, and the other. There's all sorts going on. You've got certain people out there that are fed up with it all, so they just keep themselves to themselves. So, you've got a whole mixed bag of people when it comes to this world. And so, we're living in that time where Babylon, that confusion, has reached a peak. And obviously, so some of these the advice that Apostle Paul gives obviously applies to now. There's no real rules. Really, if you go by the Most High's rules, we all woke up to the truth today. If we all want to follow the laws and the commandments, 99.9% of everybody would be dead, because we all committed adultery in some sort of way. You either slept with someone else's woman, or this woman has had multiple partners. Or some of them, you've got the alphabet people, they'll be definitely put to death, burnt alive, and so on and so forth. So, that's the whole idea. You're under grace. You kind of got to take it. You got to take your own situation and use the knowledge of the scriptures and try to navigate through the mess that is Babylon the Great and the world that we live within. It says, for I would that all men were even as myself. It says, but every man hath his proper gift of the Most High. It says, one after this manner and another after that. So, the Most High ain't just going to have 144,000 men out there. It says 144,000 men undefiled, virgins. They're not virgins physically. They're not all sitting out there at home with no woman, never had no sex. And because that is what Apostle Paul's technically saying. Well, that's what I'm doing, but I'm not everybody. So everybody can't do exactly what I'm doing. But you're asking me for advice. But I can't tell everybody what they should do in their own walk of life. So you only use yourself as the example. It says, for I would that all men were as myself. It says, but every man had his proper gift of the Most High, one after this manner and another after that. So if you're in a time where the Most High gave you a woman, you woke up to this truth, you realize you're a Hebrew Israelite, you found out maybe your wife wasn't a virgin when you met her, but at the same time, it's the gift that you got, it's the woman that you've been given, and so on and so forth. It says, I would say thereof, to the unmarried and widows, it is good for them to abide even as I. It says, but if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn, burn with desire. It says, and unto the married I command you, ye not I, but the Lord. Let not the wife depart from her husband. So this is now going back to commandments. The wife is not supposed to leave the husband to go and find another man. It says, but and if she depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband. and let not the husband put away his wife. So, for example, even myself, like I had this argument, I'm pissed off, I was mad, I didn't really want to talk to her, X, Y, and Z, this, that, and the other. But at some point in your mind, she said to me at one point, "So what are you saying?" And I said, "Well, I didn't say it, but in my mind, well, I can't leave you. I met you, you was a virgin. If I leave you, you go and sleep with someone else. You become an adulteress, and the Most High might put me to death for causing it." So I got that. When you go back to the scriptures, it's categoric that I had to say, well, now I'll have to get over it, and I'll have to deal with this. It says, but if she depart, let her remain unmarried, or be reconciled to her husband, and let the husband put away his wife. It says, but to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother hath a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away. What happens is exactly what I just said. You come into this truth. You've got a woman. She's unbelieving, but what are you going to do? Leave her for her to go and commit adultery one more time by having to go and find somebody else? So we've all got these different scenarios, these different situations. Some of us came into this truth without a woman. Some of us came into this truth with a woman. Maybe you've been with your woman for 10, 20, 30 years, and then you found out you're a Hebrew Israelite. How are you going to then just walk out the door and say, see you later, goodbye? And you break up that unit between the family and the children and so on and so forth. You cause a lot of heartache. She then has to go out and find somebody else to commit adultery with, and then there's that man. They're going to treat the kids right, and you've just created a whole bombshell of like a bomb explosion of problems. So that's why it's better. You say when you weigh up the two evils, it says, "But the rest I speak, but to the rest speak I, not the Lord. If any brother have a wife that believeth not, and she be pleased to dwell with him, let him not put her away." So even in my situation, like I say, you sit there and you think, well, what's the conclusion of this matter? I can't put you away. You haven't committed adultery. And really, when you think about it, like, it's, I think, well, you made a mistake. We live in this world. You're not a believer. So you don't know what I know. You don't see the world the way that I see it. And that's where the real problem is. So what I've actually done is used this scenario that I've just been through in the week to actually break down to her that, look, next time you want to do this or do that, check with me first, and I'll show you in the scriptures. And that's all you've got to do. I ain't going to sit there and try and overload her with information in day one. But the first thing I said was, you're looking for guidance, so on and so forth. You got to use the right name. So I gave her the name. Where it goes from there, I don't know. But slowly, I'll just drop bits of information and allow the mind to adapt it. And then if she can at least understand where you're coming from, the fact that you're in the truth, you've got this particular mindset. Even if they're not a full believer in the way that you are, you can kind of trying to make it work. So you've kind of got to work with that over time. But again, it's every couple's different, every people's different. So how are you going to sit there and give a rule and an answer? Everybody likes to say, well, what should I do? Well, what should I do? Well, what should I do? Well, the Bible can't give you 8 million different scenarios and 8 different million answers for each different scenario. You have to pick it up, obviously, within the spirit. But it says, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. It says, else were your children unclean, but now they are holy. So again, you've met this woman. You just found out you're a Hebrew Israelite. You found out the true understanding of the scriptures. You realize if a woman if you sleep with another woman, you're committing adultery. You're sleeping with somebody else's wife, or she's sleeping with another man. But you've been together for 10, 15 years. She left that man a long time ago. Now you came to the truth. You don't have to leave that woman and say, well, you're not a virgin. I can only be with a virgin. You're living under grace. You're living in Esau's captivity. You can't follow the laws to 100% as much as you want, because society will not allow you to do it. So don't be over righteous. Don't shoot yourself in the foot. So just kind of take it bit by bit. But it says here, it says, for the unbelieving husband is sanctified by the wife, and the unbelieving wife is sanctified by the husband. Else were your children unclean. It says, but now are they holy. So the fact that it tells you right there. So you've come into this new understanding. Now you understand what the true understanding of the law is as of today. We're dealing with a living power. So what happens today, what happens tomorrow, it's all adaptable. It all changes. It all counts. And at the same time, you obviously from that point onwards, you're supposed to do the best you can when it comes to following these laws and commandments. If you've got a woman or if you've got a man, and then for example, if you're a woman and you've got a man, you found out you're a Hebrew Israelite, you come to this truth. Don't worry about the past. Just don't go around sleeping behind his back. If you're a man, likewise, you just found out you're a Hebrew Israelite. You can get a woman that doesn't have a man. You can kind of like, you're with a woman, and you're already with a woman. Basically, she's an unbeliever. She doesn't have another man, but she did have multiple previous partners. You can get over that because you've just found out from today as the truth. But then don't go around sleeping with other people's wives, behind people's back, because you're just carrying on willfully sinning. It says, but if the unbelieving depart, let him depart. It says, a brother or a sister is not under bondage in such cases. It says, but the Most High have called us to peace. It says, for what? So you ain't got to hold her down and tie her to the chair because she wants to leave, because now you've come to become a Hebrew Israelite. It says, but the Most High have called us to peace. It says, for what knowest thou, O wife, whether thou shalt save thy husband? Or how knowest thou, O man, whether thou shalt save thy wife? It says, but the Most High have distributed to every man, as the Lord hath called every one, so let him walk, and so ordain one in all churches. It says, is any man called being circumcised? Let him not become uncircumcised. Is any man called in uncircumcision? Let him not be circumcised. Circumcision is nothing, and uncircumcision is nothing, but the keeping of the commandments of the Most High. It says, let every man abide in the same calling wherein he was called. It says, art thou being called, being a servant? It says, care not for it, but if thou mayest be made free, use it rather. For he that is called in the Lord, being a servant, is the Lord's freeman. Likewise also he that is called, being free, is the anointed servant. It says, ye are brought in with the price, but not ye the servants of men. Brethren, let every man wherein he is called, therein abide with the Most High. I mean, he goes on, I'm not going to read the whole chapter, but it goes all the way up to verse 40. But I kind of brought out the main topic of what I wanted to go into. There's multiple different scenarios and situations out there. And like I say, you could get, I'm using my example because it's easy to use. I met this woman, so she's a virgin. So I came to the truth. So I found out, okay, that's cool. So I don't have to worry about that. But then I still receive trouble in the flesh because she's not a believer. She might think it's okay to eat pork. She might think it's okay to get tattoos. She might think it's okay to you obviously got these women that they wear men's clothing. Really, as a man, you want to see your woman in feminine clothing. This, that, and the other. But then you got some women that they're wearing the jeans and so on and so forth. There's multiple things that they could, for example, even when the woman's at time of the month, you're supposed to be living in a separate part of the separate house, separate building to what they live in, but you don't do that. You're in the house with them. So these things, you can't really control, but you're with this unbelieving woman, and everything goes swimmingly and smoothly. But one day something will happen where it's gonna piss you off. She, like I say, she might come home with a tattoo. She might come home with a pork sandwich, and then you're cussing, you're shouting, you're this, you're that, and then you're then involved in this scenario, and you're going, well, I'm a Hebrew Israelite, and this is what I believe, and blah blah blah. But she ain't a Hebrew Israelite, but you wanted to stay with her, so you kind of got to deal with it. And this is that tightrope. That's why Apostle Paul says ultimately it's just better not to be with a woman, because you've got nothing to worry about. You've got no hassle. You've got no overhanging headache, no issues. But it is what it is. Again, what the Most High, what Apostle Paul said, the Most High has gifted us different scenarios, different situations, different lifestyles. So we can only follow them. And that's like I tried to show you over the last 3 weeks, what I'm doing, what I've been doing over the last previous 3 weeks. I'd like to think, yeah, I could just make a video every day, just pull up a chapter, but it don't work like that for me, because the Most High don't want it to work like that. He wants me to speak and present something, and then I got to go and do it, live out a scenario, mentally come to terms with it, present it in the scriptures, and then make the next video. So, like I said, I don't know what the next video is going to be, but I'm pretty sure something's going to happen. It might not happen, then I might just pick these. The spirit's like the wind. So I hope that's edifying. I'm going to leave it right there. Until next time, all praises to Yahweh, Ba'ashim, Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashim, Rakak, Wadash. Until next time, Shalom.